Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Radical Civility. My name is Benjamin Piccini, and I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm doing this whole thing, and specifically why commandments. Um, my the reality is the reason why I'm doing it is because I talk about something interesting once a week, and the other time a week I am unkind to my audience and let them hear my ramblings about civility. That's the reality of it. But my dream, my fantasy is that one day on Facebook or Twitter there will be an argument going on, and somebody will say, I think this argument could be improved greatly if only we listened to this podcast episode by Ben Piccini about how to be nicer to each other and how to make our arguments more productive and more useful. Like I'm hoping that this will become that thing where you say, what's missing from this? One key ingredient, and you steal one of these podcast episodes, you post it, people hear it, and they go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I should do that. So that's the idea behind these microcast episodes. So the Nickelodeon is where I talk about random stuff, and the microcast is where I talk about, like, how does this stuff work? How do we become better at disagreeing? So far it's working well. By the way, the laboratorium is off to the races. A bunch of you have joined. I hope you're enjoying it. I will be posting there a little bit more often. I encourage you to post as well. Anything that you find interesting, especially on the topic of civility and disagreeing differently. So far, I just want to review really quick. We've kind of gone over two of the commandments so far. The first one is radical civility, which means civility is a mode of engagement. It's how we engage. So when you see somebody not engaging, you can call them on it. You can say, that's not actually being civil. That's just being cowardly. I'm going to bring up what I hope is no longer a controversial topic. Colin Kaepernick, when he knelt during the national anthem, offended a lot of people. But independent of what your views on his take was or on any of those things, I have a hard time arguing that he wasn't being civil. He was engaging. He was engaging as respectfully as he knew how. When he did that, he spoke first with a member of the military who said, I don't want to disrespect the flag, but I do think it's important to raise this issue. What might be a good way to do it? And they said, kneeling is actually a show of reverence, but it lets you stick out in a way that lets you raise your voice. I actually think that that's a very good example of civility, even if it bothered some people. In fact, that's kind of the point, right? Having a disagreement is going to be bothersome to some people. That's how it works. So civility is a mode of engagement. That's commandment number one. Number two, we've got the word grace. Grace, above all, grace. Grace is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and so I'm trying to define it. Last week we talked about how grace is goodwill. Another way to put that I've thought of since is good faith. We always talk about, well, I don't feel like you're arguing in good faith. Now, I think you can have arguments that aren't in good faith, but you need to step back and realize that that's what's going on and ask yourself whether it's going to be worthwhile to have an argument that's not in good faith and what good you can do if you're acting in good faith but the other person isn't. All of that is kind of wrapped up in this concept of grace. Well, today I'm going to continue on the topic of grace, and today I'm going to talk about grace as triage. So I love the cute little story about the boy who walks down the beach throwing starfish into the water. I think it's actually a very touching story for two reasons. First, because I think that there is nobility in doing what is in your power. But second, because I like to imagine in my head, I guess I should say, there's nobility in doing what is in your power, even if it's not going to be enough to win. Right? There's just something inherently good in do all that you have the power to do, even in the face of insurmountable obstacles. But in the second place, I like to imagine that that boy at some point becomes an engineer and designs really clever nets that keep the starfish from washing up on shore, and keeps them safe. Or maybe he runs for office and encourages every member of his community to go out and throw 5 starfish back into the water. I don't know. He finds a way to, I think it was a he in the story. Maybe it was a she. I've never thought about that before. I probably imagined that it was me doing it. So I'm going to go with he. So I think he probably, to my mind, he went and did something good to solve the long-term problem. Okay. But at the end of the day, there's something really deeply powerful about the starfish story. And I think it is this idea of doing all of the good that you can, even if you can't do all of the good that the world needs. But it's also the idea of don't be dissuaded by the fact that you can't do it all. So I I posted something interesting on Facebook recently about education and discipline and behavior, and it was interesting to hear the responses come up. And one of the things that I've started responding with is, in education, we're not very good at triage. We have a hard time with Mr. Spock's counsel that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. In education, we're trained, and for good reason, we're trying to help every child. And that's just the default setting. That's how we work. We need to help every single child. And by the way, most teachers think this way. It's a good thing. That's the mindset that we need to have. But there needs to be somebody who's able to say, okay, but what can you actually accomplish? Because if you try to accomplish everything, you might end up accomplishing a lot less than if you said, I know I can accomplish 80% and do it well, but I can't do the other 20%. I think that this idea of triage is always going to be uncomfortable, and yet it is taught to medical professionals for very good reason, because you will end up saving more lives on net than if you try to imagine that you can help everything everywhere. And the example here with social media is very straightforward. If you go onto the internet and you find whether, on your social media platform of your choosing, and you try to fix everything that's wrong on that platform, you will absolutely be overwhelmed. You won't be able to do it. And so this aspect of grace in this case is saying, giving yourself grace, showing yourself, seeing your best intentions as good enough, and excusing the fact that you didn't have enough to fix every single problem that was out there. And let me be really clear, a lot of this is absolutely selfish, right? A lot of this that I'm talking about is about emotional self-preservation. So there's this thing called spoon theory, which I know it sounds really silly, but it's absolutely fascinating, and it's a very good analogy. And ever since a friend of mine taught it to me, I've never been able to put it down. And spoon theory is very straightforward. It's spoons are actually, it's not very easy to explain. You should look up spoon theory. That's a better way. But let me just use it, and you can probably infer what the meaning is. If I have a lot of spoons, I am able to have lots of really interesting emotional conversations. If I'm low on spoons, I don't have the bandwidth. I guess that's a good analogy. I don't have the bandwidth to engage in these really deep and hard conversations. And so when it gets a little bit too hard or a little bit too difficult, I just say, you know what, I think I'm out of spoons. I think I need to back out. The emotional self-preservation there, the grace that you have to give yourself to say, it's okay, you don't have to stay and fight this entire battle, I think is absolutely critical. But I also think it's a question of triage. What good can I do today? And when I have done that good, do I have permission to leave, having left things a little bit better? Let me be explicit about something, because the first commandment is that we need to engage. We have to have hard conversations, and I believe that. I agree with that. But I think that sometimes that might come across to people that what we're saying is you need to go out there and fix everybody else's thinking that's wrong. I think that's highly presumptuous. And I do it all the time too, by the way. We all do it. We're all human, right? But going into a discussion and saying, well, I'm right and you're wrong and I'm going to change your mind, not only is it presumptuous on our end that we have all the answers, but we're very good at that as human beings. We just put our walls up and we stop listening. So in the first place, we might be wrong. So it's not healthy for our intellectual humility. But in the second place, even if we are right, we are not likely to make much progress that way. So instead, you ask about triage. What can I do meaningfully with the time and resources that I have that will do the most good? Right? In economics, we learned that everything is a trade-off. You can't have everything. If somebody proposes an economic system that is going to get you everything you want for free, they are not proposing an economic system. They're proposing a utopia that does not exist. Right? Everything is a trade-off. You can't break that rule. Everything comes at a cost. So in this case, what are the things you can do if you stumble upon an argument that is going well or going poorly, right? What can you do to make the world a little bit better before you leave? Well, instead of trying to change people's minds, how about you add a little bit of nuance? How about in as few words as possible, you give a few insights that are missing? I constantly am thinking about my word to insight ratio and making my, insight to word ratio. Let me get the order right. I want to make that as high as possible. As many insights in as few words as possible. Can I add a couple of insights that are missing? I go on Facebook and I see somebody else has said something brilliant and clear and easy to understand, and I click share, and then I type up my own way of saying it that I want to improve on it. And I started realizing they already said it better. I don't need to add anything. Just share theirs. And if there's an insight missing, I can just share the one insight and say, I really like what this person said. And also here's my other insight that I would add. Okay. You can always leave things better than you found them. You can always listen to someone who needs listening to. And you can almost always add nuance to a conversation or a new insight that wasn't there previously. Now, beware here. You have to do it with the right intention. If your goal is to come off looking like the smarty pants, then that can be felt really clearly. Your goal honestly has to be, hey, I really like this conversation. Let me add something that I think might be valuable to some folks here. When we have a sense of grace for ourselves, when we give ourselves permission to do the best we can and no more, then I think we're in a good place. I'm going to end with two quotes. One is by John Wesley, and this kind of encapsulates what I mean by triage here. Do all the good you can by all the means you can and all the ways you can and all the places you can at all the times you can to all the people you can as long as ever you can. Another way of saying that in my faith, there's a scripture that says, it is not requisite that a man run faster than he have strength. And my dad always liked to point out, but it is requisite that we run. Right? It doesn't say walk. We're expected to do everything in our power and no more. And if we do all that's in our power, then we can be assured that good things will come of it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you find it helpful. Radical Civility is written, produced, and edited by Benjamin Piccini. The views in Radical Civility are not necessarily the views of my employer, my religion, my family, or myself in the future when I'm smarter and wiser. Bye, everybody.